Hi, and welcome back to today's video in the Study NFE's Daily With series. In today's video, we'll be exploring all the different ways in which a comma is used. But mainly, we'll be talking about the Oxford comma. The Oxford comma is in the example that you can see on your screen at this moment, the comma just before and. It's a pretty controversial subject in the world of style and usage. Many guides, as we learn later, support its use, while many guides do not. So today, we'll find out exactly when we should use this comma and when it is optional. First, let's understand the various ways in which commas are used. Firstly, commas are used with a list of things. Often you can have a list of subjects, like the example that you see on the board. India, Pakistan, and Nepal are in South Asia. India, Pakistan, and Nepal is a list of countries. Whenever you have such a list, especially as you can see in the subject position, the Oxford comma, the comma just before the and, is optional. Another way in which you can have lists in a sentence is when you have a list of verbs or actions. Look at the example. The friends sang, danced, and laughed all night long. Here the three verbs or actions in the list are sang, danced, and laughed. Here too, the comma before and is optional. This is another way in which lists may appear in a sentence. This is a list of objects. The example is, last year, I visited Berlin, Frankfurt, and Munich. Here the three objects, Berlin, Frankfurt, and Munich, make up the list of objects. Here too, the comma before the and is optional. Now we'll look at a few other ways in which the comma is used. Here, the use of the Oxford comma is not optional because there are no lists. The first is when you're separating two independent clauses, usually in a compound sentence. An independent clause is a subject-verb-object, a complete sentence in itself. Here in the example, the sun was setting is an independent clause because it can also be a sentence in itself. The second clause, the stars began to twinkle, is also an independent clause. Whenever you join two such independent clauses using and or any other coordinating conjunction, it is recommended that you use the comma just before the and. Commas are also used to separate introductory phrases from the rest of the sentence. Here, in the example, after breakfast is the introductory phrase. The independent clause here is, John went outside to play. Here, it is recommended that you use the comma immediately after the introductory clause or phrase. Sometimes, appositives are also used in sentences. Appositives are non-essential structures that are not really part of the independent clause. Here, the phrase, a talented artist, is the appositive. The independent clause is, my friend created a beautiful painting. Whenever you use such an appositive, put commas on both sides of it to clearly show that it is non-essential and thus not a part of the independent clause. Sometimes, the appositive position can also be occupied by a full relative clause. Here, the relative clause is, which was released last year. This describes the subject of the independent clause, the movie. It answers the question, which movie? The independent clause, of course, is, the movie was a big hit. Commas are also used in quotation. A quotation is when you replicate word by word what somebody has said. Look at the example. He said, quotation marks open. I'll be there by 5 o'clock. Quotation marks closed. Whenever you quote, make sure you have a comma just before the first quotation mark. Commas are also used to separate two coordinating adjectives. Two coordinating adjectives are adjectives that describe the noun equally. Here the two coordinating adjectives are small and fluffy. They equally describe the noun dog. In complex sentences, commas are also used to separate the dependent clause from the independent clause. The dependent clause in this example is because he was always late. The independent clause is the teacher reprimanded him. However, when the clauses are inverted, when the independent clause starts the sentence, like in the second example, the teacher reprimanded him because he was always late. When this happens, when the independent clause starts the sentence, there is no need for a comma. Now we come to the Oxford comma. We have already understood when it is optional. Now let us understand when it is absolutely necessary. Using the Oxford comma becomes essential when without it there would be ambiguity, or two meanings or more than two meanings would apply to the sentence that has been written. The Oxford comma is again a very controversial subject. There is no one guide that basically governs the use of English worldwide. A lot of American guides support the use of the Oxford comma. However, a lot of British guides do not support its use. Thus, what is important is to understand when it is optional and when it is necessary. This is one example where the Oxford comma is absolutely necessary. There's a difference in meaning in these two sentences. Look at the first example. I met my father, comma, a politician and a criminal. Here, this sentence actually means that the writer's father is a politician and a criminal. Now look at the second example. I met my father, comma, a politician, comma, and a criminal, full stop. This means that there are three persons that you met in the past. One is your father, the second is a politician, and the third is a criminal. Thus, the first example creates a lot of ambiguity. It is not clear whether you met one person or three. The second example, because the Oxford comma has been used, makes it very clear that you met three different people. Another example of the Oxford comma being used imperatively. Look at the first example. I had a super saver meal, a Coke and some fries. The meaning of the first example is that the super saver meal is a Coke and some fries. However, look at the second example. I had a super saver meal, comma, a Coke, comma, and some fries. This means that you had three things: a super saver meal, a Coke, and some fries. To avoid this kind of ambiguity, especially when there is a phrase right at the end of the sentence modifying the object, or when there are lists of nouns at the end of the sentence, sometimes in circumstances like this, an Oxford comma must be used. Thanks for watching this video. For more videos, stay tuned to Study Unifee's Daily Wits. To contact Study Unifees about improving your English or for help with test prep for IELTS, PTE and TOEFL, just log on to studyunifees.io. Till then, all the best for your future plans.